Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome back to TMI, a series of talks on mental health, where we remind you that when it comes to mental health, no information is too much information. Really sorry about starting this late, but I'm just very excited for today's talk, and I'm happy that a lot of you are still logged in and tuning into this. I wanted to give this opportunity also if like you have any friends who were initially interested in this event, please let them know that we are now live so that they can catch everything live and then of course send your questions later. But just to give you a quick recap, so the past couple of days we were talking about mental health and in very specific scenarios even. For October 1, so that was the other day, we had Angeli, who is a mental health advocate but also has been in the HR profession for a while. So she talked about mental health at work, and we were able to answer some questions that you might have in terms of how mental health affects like your performance at work, and of course how open can you be in your workplace about the status of your mental health, right? And then yesterday we had Aliana Fuentes, who is a mental health therapist, to talk about job hunting anxiety in particular. And to be honest, I learned so much from that discussion as well. And thank you for sending in your questions for that one. So that one was in the context of job hunting. Now, I realize that a lot of you may not be able to relate yet to any discussions about the workplace or discussions about job hunting anxiety, because a lot of our members are also those who are still in school, right? So I invited Jamie Flores, who is actually a founding member of a student led mental health organization, to talk about school and stress in particular. I think school is always stressful in any situation, but I think now more than ever, with things going online, school perhaps has been a bit more stressful than what we're used to. Right now, I am now going to welcome Jamie to give us a short discussion first or lecture about school and stress. And I'll appreciate it if you can send in your questions in advance in the comment section as well. If anything she talks about, piques your interest or your curiosity, or any situations you might have discussed, you have very specific questions about, feel free to comment that in the comment section, and we'll have enough time later in our Q&A to address those live. But now let's welcome Jamie to give us a short talk on school and stress.
Hi everyone. Nice to meet you. Let me just share my screen. So yeah, hello. My name is Jamie Flores, and I will be talking about managing school and stress. So before I proceed, I'd just like to add more information about what Deirdre said about me. So I'm a recent graduate from the University of the Philippines, Diliman, with a degree in BA English Studies Language. Um, I'm currently working as an operations associate trainee for a UK-based edtech company. So when I'm not doing that, I'm I'm a mental health advocate. I try to spread awareness about mental health by giving these kinds of talks. So yeah, um, I'd like to talk about a bit about my background in mental health and the organization from which I came from in the university. Okay, wait. There. So CoPUP. CoPUP is, as Deirdre has previously said, is a student-led mental health organization that was established 3 years ago. So our main thrust, first and foremost, is to spread awareness about mental health and to destigmatize the stigmatized mental health illnesses. The second thrust is to provide a supportive environment for individuals experiencing mental health disorders within and outside the university. It's based in University of the Philippines, Diliman. As I've previously said, it was established 3 years ago. So some of our projects include mental health talks like this. So we also ask professionals to talk about mental health. And when we're not doing that, we also hold discussions with other organizations about mental health. Aside from that, we hold distress initiatives for the students in the university. Um, some of the projects we previously had was a game day. We organized a game day for the students in the university for during the Hell Weeks. And we also have partnerships with organizations to organize pet um, pet distress day. So we have distress day with pets. So aside from that, we also have psychological first aid training for our members to help us um, accomplish our second thrust, which is to provide a sound environment for individuals experiencing mental health disorders. So we plan to establish a support group in the future. It's not. It's still in. It's still. We're still planning that out, but hopefully in the future, it plays out. Okay. So yeah, before I start with school and stress and everything else, I'd like to talk about mental health 101 first. So I want us to have a brief discussion on mental health 101. So what is mental health? How do we define mental health? And why is it important? So how do you define mental health? So um if you've if you catched Miss Aliana's talk yesterday, this was also the definition that she used. So mental health is defined as a state of well-being in which every individual realizes his or her own potential, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. So overall, mental health deals with our overall well-being. It is the state of our well-being and our ability to cope with the normal stresses of life. So um, when we talk about mental health, there are a lot of misconceptions that we have to face, or some challenges when it comes to talking to mental health, such as the idea that mental health is just for people with mental disabilities or mental issues, mental health issues, or mental health concerns. So mental health is actually something that has to do with everyone. Everyone has their own mental health to take care of. So yeah. Um, why do we think? Do you think mental health is important? And why? I hope everyone's answer here is a yes. Mental health is very important because mental health plays a significant role in our day-to-day functions, in our relationships, in our career, academics, decision making, and memory. So especially in school, mental health is very important since school is very stressful. Um, there's a lot of deadlines to meet. There's a lot of requirements that we have to pass, etc., etc. And mental health disorders and issues are increasing in number, especially for the youth. This is very alarming now, and especially during these times of isolation during this pandemic, mental health disorders and issues are also increasing in number. So yeah, as we previously said, mental health is one of the definitions of mental health is our ability to cope with the normal stresses of life. So when we talk about stress, what really is it? And is stress always bad? Is it inherently bad? Stress actually is the natural response of the body to harmful situations, whether perceived or real. So when we're in a state of when we're in a state where we're frightened or we perceive that we're in a harmful situation, a chemical reaction goes on in the body, and this triggers the stress response or the fight or flight response. But when we think about stress, it's usually in a negative light, right? So when we think about stress, it's always like our very definition of stress usually is, ay grabe stress na ako, ang dami kong work, ang dami kong kailangang gawin, ganyan ganyan, 'di ba? But actually there are two kinds of stress. First is the eustress or the positive stress. This is the doable kind of stress that has usually associated with feelings of satisfaction, motivation, and fulfillment. So this is the kind of stress that is within our capability to cope with. So for example, we have to meet a deadline. This motivates us to finish our work and meet our deadline. As for this stress, this is the negative stress that we experience, and this hinders our daily functioning. This hinders our ability to communicate and think clearly. So when this also affects our mental health negatively. When we are exposed to negative stress for a long time, this results to what we call burnout. So, what is burnout and what causes it? Usually the term burnout is associated with the workplace. So burnout, according to Maslach and Leiter, is a prolonged response to chronic emotional and interpersonal stressors. According to the World Health Organization, it is a syndrome conceptualized as resulting from chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed. Interestingly, though, I searched for academic burnout, but it does not really appear that well. It isn't used in research as much. So I saw this definition in one of the websites called University of the People. So academic burnout can be defined as a negative emotional, physical, and mental reaction to prolonged study that results in exhaustion, frustration, lack of motivation, and reduced ability in school. So as I previously said, it's interesting that um, this term is not used as much or is not recognized as much since it's like students are expected to like really be able to cope with their studies well when we know that school, especially university, is really stressful. So it's like the recognition of our stress or um the recognition of our struggles in schools are not that recognized, and we're expected to like really just cope with whatever we're handling. So these are the signs of burnout. So this is the artist used work, but I think it's still applicable. So there are physical manifestations to burnout such as headaches and muscle tensions, trouble with sleeping, feeling overwhelmed plus cynical, frustrated and unfulfilled, irritability or losing your temper, feeling depleted after school, sense of apathy or over complaining, and Sunday night blues before work. So those are symptoms of burnout. Then how do we avoid burnout, or how do we take care of ourselves such that it doesn't lead to that point, especially when we're going through so many things in school, especially that now we're working from home or we're studying from home. um these are simple tips that I came up with to manage stress from school. So first is to stay organized. I think it's very important to stay organized. If you're into bullet journals, there are also other apps online, such as Google Calendar, Trello, if you're familiar with Trello, Notion, Slack, and other things. I personally still use a I still personally use a journal, so I get the satisfaction when I get to cross out the tasks that I've done. Next is to avoid procrastination. The thing with procrastination is that when we procrastinate, we end up having a pile of undone work, and that gives us that anxiety or feeling of being overwhelmed with the things that we have to do. So I suggest that as much as possible, we try not to procrastinate. For example, in especially now, let's try to maybe focus in class, because some have this tendency to, especially if there are slides available. I'll just study it later or when I have time. Since yeah, I think that was also my challenge before. I tend to I tend to just not pay attention in class and just review the slides after when I have time. But that makes it more difficult for us. Instead of, if you pay attention in class, for example, you just get to review what you need to review for the test and not have to study the whole thing all over again. Next is to create reasonable goals. So, for example, you know that you have a paper or you have a requirement that you need to pass in next week, and it will take you probably 2 days or 3 days to work on it. Don't set it that you just allot one day for it. um, so let's create reasonable goals and priorities to be able to manage our work better. Next is to find the study style that works for you. I think that finding a study style is something that you have to do on your own. um, it's not a one size fits all kind of thing that what works for one person will work for other people as well. um because I know people, for example, who can really cram their papers, who can really cram their requirements. They can cram reviewing um for their test the night before, and it works for them. But personally, I'm not that kind of person, so I need to pace myself. I need to be able to write, for example, when I'm writing a paper, I need to write several words per day. Several paragraphs per day, in order to meet my deadline, in order to meet the word count. Yeah, so that's the type of thing that I suggest. As for self care, so these are ways. So those are the tips that I gave to prevent and manage stress from school. But self care is how we actually recover from burnout or stress. So self care is any activity that we do deliberately in order to take care of our mental, emotional, and physical health. So it is something that refuels us rather than takes from us. So I think that's a very important thing to note, that self care is something that refuels us. It re-energizes us, and not is not actually something that will be bad for us in the long run. So yeah, first tip for self care is to listen to your body. If everyone's familiar with Maslow's um, hierarchy of needs, the bottommost part is the physiological needs, right? So before we can go up the pyramid, we have to fulfill our physiological needs first. So I think it's really important to listen to your bodies, to stay hydrated, to eat a balanced diet, to sleep 7 to 8 hours every night, to exercise regularly. Let's try to exercise regularly even if we're in lockdown. Um, it helps to watch videos, I guess. There are videos on online that you can follow, Zumba. Yeah. Next is to take breaks. I emphasize this because it's a plural. Yeah, we take breaks, but not to the point that what we're doing is just breaks and not getting any work done. So one of the example I have here is since right now most of the work that we do is asynchronous. So our mode of learning now is asynchronous rather than synchronous mode of learning. So we have to do things by ourselves or learn things by ourselves. During my time in school, what I do is I actually work for 15 minutes, and then I take a break every after 15 minutes I take 5-minute breaks, and then I work again for 15 minutes, then 5-minute breaks. So this helps you from getting overwhelmed. This keeps you from getting tired, or it gives you a chance to clear your mind, or gives you a chance to breathe as well, so as to be able to work more efficiently. So yeah, I think it's important to take breaks, especially, and to set aside time for your hobbies, if you're into K-pop, if you're into K-drama, if you're into other things, if you're into knitting, or taking care of plants, those kinds of hobbies. It's very important to set aside time for those things as well. Next is to set boundaries. I know it's very difficult to do this right now, given that we're all inside our house, locked down, and it's difficult to set boundary between um, your working space and your personal space as well. So what I try to do is, since I'm also working, I try to set aside the time. My boundaries, well, not only in space but the time as well. So for example, after 10 p.m. I stop any work that I do, and do my personal things, do my hobbies, or get some sleep. Yeah. Next. Um, Next is to manage your expectations. This is one of the challenges that I experienced during my college life, especially when I have this tendency to be a bit perfectionist. So instead of being able to pass my requirements in time, I feel like it's lacking. So I tend to go over the deadline, and before until I'm satisfied with my work. So it's important to remember that finished but not perfect is better than perfect but not finished. So it's better to, meet the deadline and have it finished. Do whatever you can within that time limit. So as to not give you anxieties, since, yeah, especially when you're not meeting deadlines, it gives you that uh sense of failure, or sense of anxiety that I'm not doing enough, or something like that. So yeah, it's also better to manage your expectations of other people, um especially when there are group works. there are times when people will not be able to help us much, or and that will from those will arise negative feelings which will just stress you out. Next is to reward yourself. It's also, I think it's also important to reward yourself, if especially if you break down your tasks and you're able to achieve one step at a time, and then you reward yourself every time you accomplish one task. For example, what do I do? I usually, when I finish one task, I make a deal with myself that if I finish this, I get to watch my favorite K drama or an episode of it, or my favorite show, or I get to eat chocolates, I get to eat ice cream, or things that make you happy, whatever is that can give you a sense of joy. Um, Next is to build positive relationships. Especially right now, during the lockdown, it's important to stay connected with other people. It helps to build positive relationships with your classmates, especially if, for example, you'll be missing a session or something like that. You have someone to ask, or you have someone to ask help from if you're having difficulties with a certain lesson or something like that. It also helps to build a positive relationship with your professor. um I hope your professors were as um kind as mine were. I um I also had mental health issues during my time in college. So if I informed my professor and they were able to make accommodations for me, since I was also struggling. If you're comfortable with that, and you think you can trust your professors to, you know um uh not judge you, and if you think they're aware about mental health, and which they should be, um yeah, you can inform them that you're struggling or something. You can inform them if you're comfortable, and hopefully they can also make accommodations for you. um Next is to stay mindful. I'm not sure if everyone is familiar with the idea of mindfulness. It's about staying in the present. Uh, it's actually an exercise, it's a practice to be intentional with what you're doing in a non-judgmental way. So when you're mindful, you stay in the present, and you're very intentional about what you're doing, where you are, what has to be done, and you don't dwell in the future, or you don't dwell in the past mistakes. Sometimes when we failed at some point, we tend to carry that over to our present, which affects us negatively. So it's important to stay in the present and to stay mindful and do what you can given your circumstances. So the next one are some idea for practicing self-care. So some of these are not applicable right now since we're in lockdown. But if you can go for a walk, if you have a yard or something, you can exercise, dance, hike, swim, get a hug. Yes, that's very important. Get a hug from the people close to you. Just make sure they're not from from other places that could uh could potentially have been infected with the coronavirus. Play a dog with the dog. Pets are really helpful in managing mental health. I also have three dogs that I play with when I have the time. um clean and reorganize your room. Part of staying organized as well. Take a bath. Yeah, baths are relaxing. For your mental self care, you can read a book, learn a new skill. Since we have the time right now, I think that's also one thing that we can do if we have the time. Next is to draw. If you're into drawing, do a DIY project. If you're into knitting, if you're into crocheting, I actually crochet as well. So it helps me focus on one thing and keep myself focused and not think about other things. Color. Yeah, right now that's one of the therapies that was in. You color mandala circles or mandala forms. Next is to turn off your phone. If you're getting overwhelmed by social media, it's also helpful to turn off your phone sometimes. Then, as for emotional self care, you can meditate, practice yoga, light a candle, talk with a friend, go on a date. Not right now. Journal. Write down a list of things you're grateful for. I think Miss Aliana also mentioned that yesterday. If you could list three things that you're grateful for today, that will help help you elevate your mood. So yeah, these are also, I think, one thing I'd like to point out before I end this is to be kind to yourself and be kind to others. I think being kind gives us positive emotions, give us the positive sense of doing good, and it helps us make feel better. So be kind to yourself and be kind to others. So yeah, that's it for my talk today.
All right. Thank you so much, Jamie, especially for the tips that you gave on self care. I think like there are a lot of topics that you mentioned that would be great to unpack. Like, for example, I would really love the opportunity to discuss like procrastination even further. Me, I even refer to myself as a procrastinator. Like ever since college, that's what I would call myself because I really do have a strong tendency to procrastinate. But with going deeper into like understanding mental health further and, like my relationship with procrastination, even, um, I found like there's, I guess, like a school of thought that explains that procrastination is actually an emotional sort of like, I guess, like response to things that we do not necessarily enjoy. I don't know if like you've ever encountered any sort of explanation on procrastination, because I feel like it's very hard to avoid, but perhaps we can unpack that procrastination further. Selfishly, because I am a very self-aware procrastinator. I don't want to say procrastinator, but in my head that's what I call myself. um but yeah, what do you have any comments on procrastination? Because I think like saying to like talking about avoiding procrastination, it's really easier said than done.
Ah, yeah, that's very true. It's really easier said than done. I also had that tendency actually. Um, but when it comes to procrastination, I think it's also kind of a personal trait. Some people really do have that tendency, and if it works for them, as I've previously mentioned, there are people who can really, that's their study habit or that's their tendencies and it works for them. So I think it really is difficult to avoid, but um let's try to let's try to not procrastinate. And well, my thing was to avoid tasks from getting piled up. So if you have the time to like really uh well, I also have this rule that if you can do it in 2 minutes, you can do it right now. So that also helps me to avoid procrastination. And yeah, I think it's really a personal trait. People really have that personality that they can't avoid procrastination.
Although, like, I feel like there are just certain things that we tend to procrastinate on. Like, for example, like I live with a student at home. Of course, so my younger brother goes to school, and one of the things that he does when he's trying to avoid schoolwork is he's actually really, really productive in other things. Well, at home we call it productive procrastination, because like if he's avoiding something like a project that he has, he would do chores. He would do chores. So it was like or clean his room, for example. So we call it a productive procrastination, but we're very mindful at home of like reminding each other of that. Like, okay, you're doing chores. What are you avoiding? Um, and then so, but it's I do that too. Like it feels like a way we trick ourselves into actually like feeling okay about procrastination because we replace it with something else. But if we really think about it, we're still avoiding a task, for example, and which led me to, I think which led me to further explore that procrastination is a bit of like an emotional response more than I think a trait in people, because I really seen productive people at work, but with their personal stuff they will really like put it off or procrastinate. I feel like it's more, well, at least my take on it, and there is a school of thought on it, that procrastination is a sort of emotional response to something that we probably do not have like a good experience with, or parang, like for me, which is why it's what stuck to me as well was what you said about, it's better done than perfect, because what I realized, like looking back, and I think like applying the framework that Aliana mentioned yesterday about rest with our standing for reflect, like i I sort of realized that I tend to procrastinate on things that I really want to be done perfectly. So, but then because I think like, oh, I don't have enough time to really do it perfectly, or I'm scared that I'm not going to do it perfectly, I put it off. And so I would do all the other things that I'm okay with not doing perfectly. And then those are the things that I get done again, like sort of like a productive procrastination. And then I end up, doing a lot of things on my to do list, except that one big thing, because I have this like fear that I'm not going to be able to do it perfectly, right? But it starts with that like reflection, and if I may offer like a way for us to, if you're the type of person who does that, who procrastinates because of that particular reason, I guess like one tip I can also offer is that, I think going back to what Aliana discussed yesterday, you also have to challenge some of the thoughts that you might have about that task. So, for example, with me thinking that it has to be done perfectly, you have to challenge yourself and ask, like, who's saying that it has to be done perfectly, right? It's you, but then you've put out work that is, not perfect before, and it was still helpful or it was still valued. So, it's like, I think like the framework that was introduced yesterday is applicable as well for things like beating procrastination. But I think it's a different story when we're talking about like really like stress and just avoiding everything. Um, that's also something. But I think it's someone's like, some people just tend to cope with stress that way. Um, but I have a lot to say about this, but yeah, that was something that I just wanted to unpack a little bit. Unless you have anything to add, Jamie, because we don't have any questions right now, but I really encourage anyone who's watching live right now to send in your questions if you have any, so that we can ask Jamie, or if I'm able to, I may be able to address them as well. But Jamie, do you have other things to add on procrastination, or you're good?
I'm good.
All right. Okay. I like what you said also. So I was like taking a bit some notes while you were talking. No. I think what's very important as well is like what you said about building positive relationships, which I think is reflective of, what we've been talking about the past 2 days as well, especially with day one with AR talking about like having a psychologically safe space at work, right? I think if you feel psychologically safe as well in your school, then you'd be able to be comfortable talking about your stress or your mental health with your professors. Like um I have a couple of friends who are in grad school right now, and I've really seen the difference between like a close friend of mine who is for example, who transferred law schools actually. And the difference between the two environments is really drastically different, which helped her cope with the stress more. And I want to stress that having a psychologically safe space at school as well is very important. And another friend I have who is in grad school as well right now felt psychologically safe enough to disclose to her professors that she's really going through a tough time adjusting to graduate school online. So I really am amazed because she was able to disclose with her professor and the deadline was extended, right? So having that sort of like relationship as well with the people in your environment helps. So during this time, I guess like my reminder for anyone dealing with school and stress as well is trying to find a psychologically safe space for you to be able to build those relationships and be transparent about what you're going through, because you never know what kind of like what we mentioned these past couple of these accommodations can be made for people who are struggling with mental health right now. I was wondering if you have any experiences that you can also speak about in terms of like building positive relationships at school that can help us cope with stress in school.
Yeah, actually, my department, Department of English and Comparative Literature, is I'd say is a very psychological safe environment. So um actually there were instances of people attempting suicide in among our students. So that that it's sad that it kind of triggered that, but it helped make my professors more aware of the realities. Um, I won't mention her, but I won't mention her name. But there was a professor of mine who previously said actually that she compared her times, like during my time, ano ba yung mental health na yan, nung kami naman we do what we can and we're okay, we're fine with what we're doing. Eh, mas stressful pa nga nun, wala pang internet, wala pang mga ganun. So after some time, after the incident where a person attempted to yeah, attempted to commit suicide, there have been several, I think, talks with the professors about mental health, and they've become more accommodating of students. They're they actually put it in the syllabus that if you want to, if you want to have some accommodations, you can inform the professor beforehand and present whatever evidences that you have, so that we can make the accommodations. Although I have qualms with that, personally, with the syllabus thing, since not everyone can afford to, get diagnosed with a real psychologist or psychiatrist. Not everyone can afford that healthcare as of the moment. So um, it helps that the professors are very accommodating and understanding of the situation.
Yeah, I think so. It's really sad to hear that it like an attempt has to be had like happened
Mhm.
to be able to raise that sort of awareness, right? Which is why we still try as much as possible to organize talks like this, because I feel like people tend to start having those conversations about mental health once someone's life is already like endangered or taken, or is affected by it. I feel like which is why we do these talks, right? So that it doesn't have to reach a point where something like that happens before we make accommodations. And I resonate with what you said, that in the same way I feel like sometimes like a lot of people require a sort of like diagnosis for mental illness before they start accommodating um people better, when in fact it's like, if you think about it, like stress, anxiety, these negative thoughts and feelings, it's a completely like natural part of being human. It's like we just to draw and remind everyone of the distinction between mental health and mental illness, right? um it's not just like because you don't have a mental illness doesn't mean that you are automatically mentally healthy, right? And I feel like we don't talk about that enough, that mental when we talk about mental health, it's not just about mental illness. And we don't have to reach a point where someone has to be diagnosed with mental illness in before we treat them with compassion or understanding, right? So I do acknowledge that we still have a long way to go there, and I do hope like talks like this, raising awareness on mental health is very much part of how we can normalize taking care of like anyone's mental health outside of the context of mental illness. We have a question from Facebook first, so let's address a question from Facebook first. The question is, if you want to approach your employer or professor about your mental health and accommodations that may be available, how should you approach it? Uh, Jamie, do you want to take this question? I can add later, but I think the question can be addressed to you as well.
Okay. Um. Okay. How should you approach it? Personally, I've already approached my professors before about mental health, and I think that you should just be honest with what that you're struggling. If you're very comfortable with that professor, and I hope they're understanding, you can just be honest with that. You're experiencing or struggling with the schoolwork, and that you might need some time or more time compared to others, that to submit a requirement or to do a particular requirement for the subject. And um what else, it helps to be really just show them that you're being sincere, that you need some time to you need some time to yeah, you need more time to complete a particular requirement or something.
All right. Just to add to that, no, I actually have a couple of like very specific ways in mind. This is coming from a person who has, I guess, been on the other side of like trying to negotiate something, or so I'm using that lens, right? Which is by no means not an endorsement that this is the best way to talk about mental health with someone. But usually when I'm trying to get someone on the same page with me and understand me, I start with that, like making sure that there is already a positive relationship that exists there, and that there is trust there in between. So for example, if you're talking to an employer, for example, or a professor about it, that means there's a relationship there where you have to submit something or you have to perform in a certain way, and there is that expectation. And so you want to also start with like giving that assurance that this like your performance at work or at school is being affected. So you have to speak to them in a way that it relates to them, and not just like, oh, I need a break because I'm feeling the stress. You want to also put yourself in their shoes and remind them that, because, and we've talked about this in the past couple of days, there is a relationship between your performance and your mental health. And so want to remind them that if being able to take care of your mental health means being able to take care of or your performance in your like relationship with them, whether it's like an employer employee relationship or a student professor relationship. I mean, what kind of professor would want to fail students, right? Like, they're there to teach you, and so you need to appeal to that side of them and remind them that what they want, for like their goal is for you to be able to perform at school. And so if that is the goal, and just get that perspective when you're explaining that. And so if the goal is for me to perform in this role, whether as a student or as an employee, then and my mental health affects this, then I want you to understand that this is where I'm coming from in terms of talking to you about it. And then would be good also to make it really a two-way conversation. So invite them to, like, one of the, again, this is coming from the lens of someone who does negotiate. So you want to be able to help them also arrive at the same conclusion that you have arrived. So you don't want to go there and simply just ask for like time off or an extension, although would some there are cases where it's best to lead with that. But it's also good to help them, go through the steps of coming to the conclusion that the best way to address whatever mental health issue is happening right now, the best way to approach that or to manage that is the same thing that you are asking for, which is like, I think an extension, for example, on a deadline would be best for me. And just like trying to frame the conversation in a way that allows them to arrive at that same conclusion, so it doesn't feel, at least from their end, it doesn't feel like you simply just asked for it and assume that, like, especially if you're not sure where they stand on mental health awareness. So you want to be able to, I guess, like, have that patience to take them through those steps. If you are in a psychologically safe space at work or at school, it's a much easier ask. Like, you simply have to ask and that's it. But so that approach might be more useful if you're a little bit more cautious, and you're not sure where your employer or your professor stands on mental health awareness, right? I hope that helps. I'm sorry, I tend to be very, very specific with when I try to address questions like this. So I hope that helps as well. But of course, combined with what Jamie said about just simply being honest, because you don't want to approach it also in a way that's dishonest or disingenuous to where you're really at, right? Um, I hope that helps. We have one more question that we have, and I think this is also, I think, a very important question that we can possibly address before we close today's session with Jamie. Is This question is very interesting. So, Jamie, I want to get your input on this. Although you've kind of hinted on it already with sort of like, not everyone has that same privilege. But the question is coping with stress a bit bourgeois? Not sure if you. I mean, I think you understand naman what they mean by bourgeois. But yes, is coping with stress a bit bourgeois? What do you think about that, Jamie?
Um, I guess I wouldn't say that it's burgess per se, but since there are different ways by which we can cope with stress, but um the availability of mental health mental health
Support.
men- yeah, mental health support uh for people, especially those from the lower lower sorry from from the from the lower side of society is not really uh, it's almost non-existent, since they're not really also aware of the things that are happening with mental health. um Mental health to a certain extent becomes a bit a burgess thing when people are when the only ones who are able to avail that kind of not really, not excuse, but that reason, or who can avail that kind of reasoning that I have to take a break, I have to, because I'm stressed, is the people who are privileged enough to take a break, I guess. um for people with in the lower side of society, they can't really afford to take a break, since if they take a break, they won't be able to earn money enough for the meals, for their meals for the day, or to pay for rent or whatever they have to pay for.
All right. So, like, thank you for those points, Jamie. I definitely agree that those who are not as privileged economically might have a different relationship to stress. I know, like, especially these past couple of months with Filipino resilience sort of gaining a lot of like attention online. It really does seem like being able to cope with stress uh, is a is something that's for more privileged people, given that exactly what Jamie said, a lot of the those who do feel stress try to dismiss it because it's very hard to address, especially when you're worried about whether you have anything to eat or supporting your family, or anything like that, right? So in that sense, coping with stress is also a discussion on privilege. But I think also, coming just to wrap up with what Jamie said, right? That those who aren't as privileged actually don't have a lot of access kasi to information about coping with stress, right? A lot of our coping mechanisms we're not even that fully aware of, right? For one thing, like, I've only been aware of my own coping mechanisms with stress because I did extensive research on it, but that's because I'm a psych major, right? But for those, for example, who don't have that access to, like, for example, even simply material online about stress, right? They're not very much aware of how they cope with it, like drinking, or any, actually, even just like escapism, procrastination is a way to cope with stress, right? But we're not very aware of how we do it, but we do it nonetheless. And the fact of the matter is, there are healthy coping mechanisms and there are unhealthy coping mechanisms, and it starts with the awareness of what how we cope in general. And again, because it's not at the forefront, like, we haven't made a lot of efforts, I think, as a country, to bring that conversation down to even those who are not as economically privileged. I do think that, yes, coping with stress is a bit burgess, but I really hope that it doesn't stop there, right? That we, I mean, through, like, this is just the very small contribution to raising more, like, awareness on mental health, and just making sure that everyone in this group, we're all on the same page on what mental health means and how to take care of ourselves, more importantly. the buck doesn't stop here. I really hope that even those who are tuned in right now, if you do have like family members, for example, who aren't as aware of mental health, on what it is, I hope that you've learned something from the past 3 days from all of our speakers, and that you're able to um, spread awareness on the right things about mental health and taking care of it. So I hope it really doesn't stop with like talks like this. Let's try to, as much as possible, um, to keep like making these discussions on mental health more inclusive, so that even those without privilege are able to I guess address their mental health as well. So um, that's a very long outro, but it's really what I want everyone to take away from this entire series, which I think is, I mean, I credit our intern Kim for the name of this talk series, which is TMI, Too Much Information, because I really do agree when it comes to mental health, there's no such thing as too much information, and I think that helps with the cause of raising awareness on mental health. Let's keep spreading like the right information about it, so that more people are aware of it. I hope that leaves us all in a more like actionable note as well. That I don't want you to, you know, go to these talks, learn as much as you can, and then keep it to yourself, right? We want to keep spreading awareness on this. So, um, that's what I want to leave everyone with. Thank you so much, Jamie, for joining us today. Thank you for your talk, for all of the reminders to take care of ourselves. Um, to again, a lot of really actionable things there for everyone, especially those who are in school right now. And that concludes our series of talks on mental health to start Mental Health Awareness Month. There, I know that there's so many organizations actually that are doing some events this month. If you want to learn more about that, I'll probably start the thread within the group. I know you're all like part of like different organizations who might be organizing something else for the month of October with regards to mental health. I'll start a thread on that, and then you can just simply comment like any events that people can are open to attend, so that they can find out more about mental health, right? Especially during this time. So thank you so much for being with us. I'll actually, well, you will be seeing me again next week, but outside of the career support group in the Liyab main page, because we'll be talking to another career counselor to talk about well, what are the common concerns of like Gen Z students like you in terms of like early career development, right? So we'll be back live on Wednesday. If you have any questions about that, please you can send them to via chat to our Leah page, or we have a thread, or you can comment it on the event page as well. But I'll be seeing you again on Wednesday. And just a short plug before we go, we also have the virtual career fair coming up. Please sign up for that. It's open to anyone, not just like those from IT backgrounds, but if you're even remotely interested in the IT industry, I really suggest that you register and sign up for that, because we do have a lot of like really educational talks in store for you. So that's it from my end. Thank you everyone for tuning in these past couple of days. Thank you again, Jamie, for lending us your time and your insights today. And if any of our previous speakers are watching, thank you so much also for lending your time. So there, I hope you have a great weekend ahead, well, at least for the rest of the weekend, and we'll see you on Wednesday. Bye.